came to fix her porch light, a simple job in a quiet town. But when she said, "You see more than you should," her voice trembled with something forbidden. What happened next would haunt him every night. The air in Port's Mill was thick with the scent of wet cedar and diesel, a mix that clung to the narrow streets like a stubborn memory. I'd been in this coastal Oregon town for 3 weeks, holed up in a cramped attic room above Carver's Hardware on Mariners Lane, a street that twisted toward the harbor like it was trying to escape. At 22, I was still piecing together what I was doing with my life. No clear path, just a restless urge to be somewhere other than the flat, predictable fields of my Idaho hometown. Port's Mill, with its fog-drenched mornings and the low groan of fishing boats, felt like a place to catch my breath, to figure out what came next. I'd landed a job at Hal's Auto and Electric, a squat brick shop tucked off Seacrest Drive, where I spent my days untangling wires in boat consoles or swapping out headlights for weathered locals. It wasn't much, but it covered the rent and left enough for a beer or two at the Rusty Anchor, a bar 2 blocks away where the jukebox played the same 5 songs on repeat. That's where I first saw her, Lydia Marrow. Not inside the bar, but outside, on a Tuesday evening when the sky was a bruised shade of purple and the wind carried the sharp tang of salt from the Pacific. I was locking up the shop, my hands stained with grease, the cold biting at my knuckles. She was across the street, leaning against a lamppost, staring up at the flickering neon sign above the bar's entrance. Her navy coat was too thin for the chill, her dark hair spilling over her shoulders, catching the light in a way that made her stand out against the gray of the town. She didn't move, not even when a pickup truck roared by, spitting gravel. There was something about her, maybe the way she held herself, steady but distant, like she was waiting for something she didn't expect to come. I couldn't tell her age exactly, but she was older than me, probably late 30s or early 40s, her face carrying a kind of quiet strength that made you look twice. I didn't mean to stare. I told myself it was just curiosity, the way you notice someone who doesn't quite fit. I tossed my keys in my pocket, ready to head back to my attic, but then I heard a sharp clatter, a glass bottle shattering on the pavement. I turned and saw her crouching, gathering jagged shards of a beer bottle that must have slipped from her hand. Her coat sleeve had slid up, revealing a thin silver bracelet that glinted under the streetlight, a small detail that stuck in my mind like a splinter. "Need a hand?" I called out, stepping toward her before I could think better of it. I wasn't the type to just jump in. But something about her, the way her shoulders tightened as she picked up the glass, made me want to help. She looked up, her eyes meeting mine for a brief, sharp moment. They were dark, almost too dark, like they held a story I wasn't ready to hear. "I've got it," she said, her voice low, steady, like she was used to handling things alone. She stood, brushing her hands on her coat, the broken glass piled neatly at her feet. "Thanks, though." I nodded, feeling a little foolish. "Just looked messy," I said, shoving my hands in my pockets. Her lips curved into a half-smile, not warm, but not cold either, just enough to acknowledge me before she turned toward the bar's entrance. I walked away, the moment already fading, but her gaze lingered in my mind, brief as it was. It wasn't attraction, not exactly, just a pull, like a tide tugging at something deep inside me. 2 days later, she walked into the shop. I was under the hood of a '98 Toyota, wrestling with a rusted alternator bolt, cursing under my breath when the bell above the door jingled. Hal's voice boomed from the front counter, warm and familiar. "Lydia, been a minute. What's the trouble?" I peeked over the engine and saw her, Lydia, standing in the doorway, her navy coat now paired with a gray scarf that looped loosely around her neck. She looked out of place against the shop's grime, like a photograph slipped into the wrong album. Her hair was pulled back, exposing the sharp line of her jaw, and I tried to guess her age again. Definitely older than me, closer to 40, though her movements had a grace that made it hard to be sure. She was twisting a set of car keys in her hand, her fingers restless. "Battery's dead again," she said, her voice carrying that same quiet steadiness. "Third time this month. I don't know if it's the car or something else." Hal scratched his chin, smearing oil across his beard. "Could be the alternator or a drain somewhere. Let's get it looked at. Owen!" He turned, waving a wrench like it was a flag. "Check Ms. Marrow's sedan, blue Civic, out front." I wiped my hands on a rag, trying not to look at her too long. "Got it," I said, grabbing my toolkit. She didn't glance my way, just handed Hal the keys and stepped back, her arms crossed like a barrier. The Civic was parked sloppily in the lot, its paint chipped and faded, like it had seen too many winters. I popped the hood, the familiar smell of oil and metal grounding me, and started checking the battery terminals. But my mind wasn't on the job. I kept seeing her standing outside the bar, staring at that neon sign like it held some kind of answer. Now she was here, in my world, and it felt like the air had thickened, like a storm was brewing just out of sight. The problem was simple, a loose connection and a battery on its last legs. I called Hal over, and he agreed to replace it. Lydia stayed by the counter, flipping through a tattered magazine, her fingers moving slowly, like she wasn't really reading. I kept stealing glances, not because I meant to, but because I couldn't stop. There was something about her, the way she held herself, like she was carrying a weight nobody could see, a story nobody knew. "You're new here," she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the shop's hum. She didn't look up from the magazine, but I froze, my wrench hovering over a bolt. "Yeah," I said, clearing my throat. "Moved to Portsmouth a few weeks ago, working for Hal." She nodded, her eyes still on the page. "Small town. You'll get used to it." There was something in her voice, not welcoming but not distant either, like she was leaving a door open just a crack. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. I tightened the battery clamps, closed the hood, and wiped my hands again, feeling her presence like a shadow I couldn't shake. When she left, the shop felt quieter, emptier, though I couldn't explain why. Hal clapped me on the shoulder, muttering about a job well done, but my mind was stuck on her, Lydia Marrow, a name that felt like the start of something I didn't understand. That night, back in my attic room, I couldn't settle. The single window overlooked Mariner's Lane, where the streetlights cast long, wavering shadows on the wet pavement. The room was small, the ceiling slanted, the air heavy with the smell of old wood and paint. My bed creaked as I sat, a thrift store novel open in my lap, but I couldn't focus. I kept seeing her, the way her coat had hung on her shoulders, the glint of her bracelet, the weight in her eyes. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was something heavier, something that made my chest tight. A week passed without seeing her. Portsmouth was small, but not so small you'd trip over the same people every day. I threw myself into work, rewiring a fishing boat's console, changing oil, patching tires. But she was there, in the back of my mind, like a song stuck on repeat. On a rainy Thursday, when the sky was a solid sheet of gray and the streets shimmered like oil, Hal called me into the break room while I was eating a peanut butter sandwich, the bread sticking to the roof of my mouth. "Owen got a house call," he said, his voice rough through the phone. "Lydia Marrow's place, porch lights out, and she's got a short in her kitchen outlet. Can you handle it?" My stomach flipped, the sandwich suddenly heavy. "Yeah, I can do it. Address?" He gave me the details. 17 Driftwood Court, a quiet street near the pine forest at the edge of town. I grabbed my toolbox, threw on a raincoat, and headed out, the wipers of my Ford slapping against the drizzle. The drive felt longer than it was, the road winding past weathered houses and sagging fences, the forest looming dark and wet on the horizon. Driftwood Court was a dead-end street, the kind where kids' bikes lay forgotten in driveways, and every house looked like it was holding on to the 70s. Lydia's place was at the end, a single story with cedar siding faded to a soft gray, the porch cluttered with potted plants, their leaves heavy with rain. I parked, my boots crunching on the gravel driveway, and approached the door, my toolbox heavy in my hand. I knocked, the sound dull against the rain's steady patter. When the door opened, there she was. Lydia, in a gray sweater and jeans, her hair loose and slightly damp, like she'd been out in the weather earlier. Her eyes narrowed slightly, like she was trying to place me, and I felt a flush creep up my neck. "You're the guy from the shop," she said, not a question, her voice carrying that same quiet strength. "Owen," I said, shifting my toolbox. "Hal sent me. Porch light and kitchen outlet, right?" She nodded, stepping aside. "Come in, it's a mess out there." The house smelled of coffee and something faintly sweet, like a candle burning somewhere. The living room was small, cozy in a worn-in way, with a leather couch that sagged in the middle and a bookshelf crammed with paperbacks, their spines cracked and faded. A single photo frame sat on a side table. Lydia, younger, maybe in her early 30s, standing on a beach with a man, both of them smiling, the kind of smile that felt like it belonged to another life. I didn't stare, but it stuck with me, that image of her happy, unguarded. "The porch light's been out for weeks," she said, leading me to the front door. "And the kitchen outlet sparks sometimes. It's unsettling." I nodded, focusing on the job. The porch light was an easy fix, corroded socket, burned-out bulb. I worked in the rain, the cold seeping through my coat, aware of her standing in the doorway, watching. Her gaze was steady, unreadable, and it made my hands clumsy, the screwdriver slipping more than it should have. "Cold out there," she said after a while, her voice cutting through the rain's rhythm. "Want coffee when you're done?" I glanced back, surprised, water dripping from my hood. Sure, thanks." She disappeared inside, and I finished the light, testing it with the flick of the switch. It glowed steady, a small victory against the gray. In the kitchen, she pointed out the outlet near the sink, an old setup with wires that looked like they'd been installed when Nixon was president. I knelt, pulling off the cover plate, and saw the problem. Loose wiring, a bit of moisture damage, the kind of thing that could start a fire if you weren't careful. "This'll take a bit," I said, already stripping wires. "Might need to replace the whole outlet." "Do what you need to," she said, leaning against the counter, close enough that I could feel her presence, like a current running through the room. The kitchen was small, the yellow cabinets faded, the linoleum curling at the edges. A single mug sat on the counter, half full of coffee, next to a stack of unopened mail. I wondered about her life, who she was when she wasn't standing here, watching me work. I focused on the outlet, testing circuits, but my mind kept drifting to her, the way she stood, the way her voice seemed to carry more than her words. When I finished, I stood, brushing my hands on my jeans. Should be good now, no more sparks. She plugged in the kettle, and it hummed to life. No sparks, no flicker. "You're handy," she said, and that half-smile was back. The one that didn't quite reach her eyes, but still felt like it meant something. "Thanks, Owen." "No problem." I packed up my tools, feeling the weight of her standing there, like she was waiting for something, but didn't know what. "Coffee's ready," she said, nodding at the pot. "If you've got time." I should have said no. Hal was waiting, the rain was picking up, and I had no business staying. But her voice, the way she looked at me, like she saw something I didn't, it held me there. "Sure," I said, setting my toolbox down. "I got a minute." She poured 2 mugs, handing me one, the coffee, black and scalding. We stood in her kitchen, the rain drumming on the roof, and I felt it. A shift, like the world was tilting just enough to pull me closer to her. I didn't know what it was, not yet, but it was there, in the steam rising from the mug, in the way her fingers brushed the counter, in the silence that felt louder than words. You don't know who's watching them now. This is just the start, and it's about to get heavier. The coffee burned my tongue, sharp and bitter, but I held the mug anyway, letting the heat ground me in Lydia's kitchen. The rain outside was relentless, a steady drum against the roof of her small house on Driftwood Court, and the air inside felt charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. She stood across from me, leaning against the counter, her gray sweater loose on her frame, her dark hair falling in soft waves that caught the dim light from the window. She was older than me, 40 maybe, though her face had a kind of timeless sharpness, a beauty that didn't rely on youth but on something deeper, something worn and resilient. Her fingers traced the edge of her mug, slow and deliberate, and I couldn't shake the feeling that every move she made was a choice, a step toward or away from something I didn't yet understand. "Thanks for the coffee," I said, my voice louder than I intended in the small space. I set the mug down, the ceramic clinking against the counter, and glanced at my toolbox by the door. I should have been gone by now, back in my truck, back to the shop where Hal was probably cursing me for taking too long, but I didn't move, and neither did she. She nodded, her lips parting like she might speak, but instead she turned to a cabinet, pulling out a tin of sugar with a faded label. "You take anything in it?" she asked, her voice casual but measured, like she was weighing each word before letting it go. "Nah, black's fine," I said, though I hated it bitter. I just didn't want to seem like I was asking for anything, like I was here for more than the job. But I was, wasn't I? I could have left 10 minutes ago, could have handed her the receipt and walked out into the rain. Instead, I was standing here, watching the way her sweater clung to her shoulders, the way her silver bracelet glinted as she moved, a small, constant reminder of her presence. She put the sugar back, her movements slow, almost too careful, like she was afraid of disturbing the air between us. "You don't talk much, do you, Owen?" she said, glancing at me for the first time since we'd started drinking. Her eyes were sharp, dark, like they could cut through whatever I was trying to hide. I shrugged, my face heating up under her gaze. "Not much to say, I guess. Just here to fix things." Her mouth twitched, that half-smile I was starting to recognize, and she looked away, out the window, where the rain blurred the world into a gray haze. "That's more than most people do around here," she said, her voice softer now, carrying a weight I couldn't place. "Fix things, I mean." I wanted to ask what she meant, but the words stuck in my throat. There was something in her tone, something that hinted at a life I didn't know. Maybe loss, maybe regret, maybe just the slow grind of living in a town like Portsmouth. I sipped the coffee again, wincing at the heat, and tried to focus on the linoleum floor, the faded yellow cabinets, anything but her. But she was there, filling the room, her presence like a low hum I couldn't ignore. The next few days were a haze of work at Hal's Auto and Electric. I rewired a fishing boat's console, changed oil for a line of pickups, and patched a radiator that leaked like a sieve. Ports Mill felt smaller than ever, the streets empty by dusk, the fog rolling in from the harbor like it was trying to claim the town. I didn't see Lydia, but she was everywhere, in the smell of rain, in the flicker of a porch light, in the quiet of my attic room above Carver's Hardware. I kept replaying that moment in her kitchen, the way her eyes had held mine, the way the air had felt too heavy for just a cup of coffee. It was stupid, I told myself. She was a customer, a woman with a busted car and a sparking outlet. But I couldn't shake her, couldn't stop wondering what her story was, what kept her here, in this faded house at the edge of town. It was Saturday when I saw her again, at the Tidewater Market on Bayside Road. I was there for bread, beer, maybe some apples. Nothing urgent, just killing time before the weekend stretched too long. The store was small, its fluorescent lights buzzing, the shelves stocked with the kind of canned goods that hadn't changed since the 80s. I turned down the aisle for canned vegetables, and there she was, holding a can of diced tomatoes, reading the label like it was a letter from someone she'd lost. She was wearing a green jacket, frayed at the cuffs, and her hair was tied back, loose strands framing her face. She didn't see me at first, and I almost turned back, not wanting to seem like I was chasing her. But then she looked up, her eyes locking on mine, and I felt that pull again, sharp and undeniable. "Hey," I said, my voice catching like a kid's. I gripped my basket, the plastic handle digging into my palm. "Hey," she said, setting the can down with a soft clink. "Owen, right?" "Yeah." I was surprised she remembered my name, and it made my chest tighten. "Stocking up?" She gave a small laugh, more a breath than anything else. "Trying to." "You?" "Same." I held up my basket, beer, apples, a loaf of bread, and felt like an idiot, standing there like I was presenting evidence. "Just the basics?" She nodded, her eyes flicking to my basket, then back to my face. "You live around here?" she asked, her voice light but curious, like she was testing the water. "Above the hardware store on Mariner's Lane," I said. "Not much, but it's home for now." She tilted her head, her gaze steady, like she was trying to see through me. "Not many people come to Ports Mill on purpose." "You running from something?" The question hit me like a jab, and I laughed more out of nerves than humor. "Nah, just wanted a change. Thought the coast might clear my head." She didn't say anything for a moment, just looked at me, and I felt exposed, like she could see the parts of me I hadn't figured out myself. "It's a good place to disappear," she said, her voice soft, almost like she was speaking from experience. "If that's what you're looking for." I didn't know how to respond. I wasn't running, not really, but her words stirred something restless in me, something I'd been trying to outrun since I left Idaho. Before I could say anything, she turned back to the shelf, picking up another can, and the moment slipped away like sand. We ended up at the checkout together, her with her tomatoes and bread, me with my beer and apples. The cashier, a kid with a face full of acne, scanned our stuff without looking up, his boredom palpable. Lydia paid first, slipping her wallet into her jacket with quick, precise movements. She glanced back at me as she headed for the door, and for a second I thought she might say something, but she just gave me that half smile and stepped out into the drizzle. I didn't expect to see her again that day, but Ports Mill had a way of shrinking the world. I was halfway to my place, the grocery bag cutting into my fingers, when I heard a car horn blare, sharp and angry. I turned and saw her blue Civic stalled at the corner of Bayside and Coral Street, the hood up, a faint wisp of steam curling from the engine. She was standing beside it, hands on her hips, staring at the car like it had betrayed her trust. I hesitated, then jogged over, the rain soaking through my hoodie. "Need a hand?" I called, echoing that first night outside the bar. She looked up, her expression a mix of frustration and something softer, like relief. "This car's trying to kill me," she said, brushing a damp strand of hair from her face. "It's been one thing after another." I set my groceries down on the wet sidewalk and leaned under the hood. The radiator cap was loose, coolant leaking in a slow shagreen drip onto the asphalt. "Radiator's leaking," I said, wiping my hands on my jeans. "I can patch it for now, but it needs to go to the shop for a proper fix." She sighed, her shoulders slumping. "Perfect. Just what I needed." I glanced at her, trying to read her. She didn't seem angry, just worn down, like the car was one more weight on a pile that was already too heavy. "I can call Hal, get a tow truck out here," I offered. "Or I can drive you home if you need a lift." Her eyes met mine, and for a moment I thought she'd brush me off again, tell me she could handle it. But she didn't. "A lift would be good," she said, her voice quieter now. "I don't feel like standing in the rain." We walked to my truck, a beat-up Ford with a dented fender and a heater that groaned more than it warmed. She climbed into the passenger seat, her jacket dripping onto the cracked vinyl, and I tossed my groceries in the back. The engine rumbled to life, and we drove toward Driftwood Court in silence, the wipers slapping against the windshield, the world outside a blur of gray. I kept my eyes on the road, but I could feel her next to me, the space between us heavy with things we weren't saying. When we pulled into her driveway, she didn't get out right away. She just sat there, looking at her house, the porch light I'd fixed glowing faintly through the mist. "You didn't have to do this," she said, her voice low, almost lost in the engine's hum. "I know," I said, my hand still on the wheel. "But I wanted to." She turned to me, her eyes searching mine, and I felt that pull again, stronger now, like a current I couldn't swim against. "You're too kind, Owen," she said, her voice soft, carrying a weight I didn't understand. She opened the door and stepped out, her boots splashing in a puddle, and I watched her walk to her house, her figure small against the gray. Back at my attic, I couldn't settle. The room felt too small, the walls pressing in, the air thick with the smell of damp wood. I kept seeing her, Lydia, with her sharp eyes and her half-smiles, the way she seemed to carry something heavy but never let it show. I didn't know her story, didn't know why she lived alone in that house with the faded cabinets and the single photo frame. But I wanted to, and that wanting scared me, because I knew it wasn't my place. The next morning, I was at the shop working on her Civic. The radiator was worse than I'd thought, and Hal had me order a new one. I kept glancing at the door, half hoping she'd walk in, but she didn't. Hal noticed, giving me a look over his coffee mug. "You all right, kid? You're dropping tools like they're hot." "Just tired," I lied, tightening a bolt with more force than necessary. He grunted, unconvinced, but let it go. By late afternoon, the radiator was in, and I volunteered to drive the car back to her place. I told myself it was just good service, but I knew better. When I pulled into her driveway, the rain had stopped, leaving the air heavy with mist. I knocked on her door, keys in hand, my heart thudding harder than it should have. She opened the door, her gray sweater loose, her hair down, a book tucked under her arm. "Car's fixed," I said, holding out the keys. "New radiator. Should be solid now." She took them, her fingers brushing mine for a half-second, and I felt a spark, not from the outlet I'd fixed, but from her, from the way her eyes held mine. "You didn't have to bring it back," she said, her voice quiet like she was testing me. "Was heading this way," I said, shoving my hands in my pockets, another lie. "No trouble." She looked at me, her gaze steady, and I felt the air shift like it had in her kitchen. "Come in," she said, stepping aside, and the words felt like a door opening, one I wasn't sure I should walk through. I followed her inside, the house familiar now, the leather couch, the bookshelf, that photo frame with her younger self and the man I didn't know. She set the book down, its cover worn, the title about grief, and I wondered again what her life was, what kept her here. "Coffee?" she asked, already moving to the kitchen. "No, I'm good," I said, but I followed her anyway, my boots loud on the linoleum. She didn't make coffee, just stood there, her hands on the counter, her back to me. I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers curled, like she was holding on to something she couldn't let go. "You don't have to keep fixing things for me," she said, her voice low, not turning around. "I can handle it." "I know," I said, and I meant it. But I didn't leave, didn't move. I just stood there, watching the way her hair fell against her neck, the way the light caught her bracelet, the way the room seemed to shrink around us. She turned, her eyes meeting mine, and there was something raw in them, something unguarded for the first time. "You're too young to be this serious," she said, her voice almost a whisper, and she took a step closer, the space between us shrinking to nothing. What she does next will change everything. "You won't see it coming, but it'll stay with him forever." The kitchen felt like it was holding its breath, the air so thick I could feel it pressing against my skin. Lydia stood close, too close, her words, "You're too young to be this serious," hanging between us like a challenge. Her dark eyes searched mine, sharp and unguarded, and my pulse thundered in my throat, a steady rhythm that drowned out the faint drip of rain from the eaves outside. I was 22, still stumbling into adulthood, and she was older. 40, I guessed, though her face carried a beauty that didn't care about years, all sharp angles and quiet strength. Her gray sweater hung loose, her hair falling in soft waves that caught the light from the window, and that silver bracelet on her wrist glinted, a small anchor in the storm of this moment. I tried to laugh, to brush off her words, but it came out rough, unsteady. "I'm not that serious," I said, my voice betraying me, too raw, too honest. I wanted to look away, to break the weight of her gaze, but I couldn't. Her half-smile flickered, not warm, but real, and it changed her face, softened the edges, made her look younger, like the woman in that photo on the beach, smiling with someone I'd never know. "You are," she said, her voice soft, almost a whisper, like she was seeing something in me I hadn't named yet. "You look at things like you're trying to understand them." "Most people here don't bother." Her words hit me, not hard but deep, like a stone sinking into still water. I wasn't used to being seen like that, not by anyone, and it made my chest tight, my hands restless in my pockets. I glanced at the counter, at the mug she'd poured me earlier, the coffee cold now, a faint stain circling the rim. The kitchen was small, the yellow cabinets faded, the linoleum curling at the edges, but it felt alive, charged with her presence, with the way she stood there, close enough that I could smell the faint floral scent clinging to her, mixed with the dampness of the rain. I shifted, my boots scuffing the floor, and tried to find something to say. "Maybe I just don't know what I'm doing yet," I said, half joking. but it came out too real, like I'd let her see something I hadn't meant to. She let out a breath, not quite a laugh, and took another step closer. The space between us was barely a breath now, and I could feel the warmth of her, the way her sweater brushed against her arms, the way her eyes held mine like they were the only thing keeping her steady. "Nobody does," she said, her voice low, like she was sharing something she'd kept locked away. "Not really." I wanted to ask what she meant, wanted to know what made her voice catch like that, but the words wouldn't come. The rain outside was a steady hum, the light from the window casting shadows across her face, and I felt like I was standing on the edge of something I couldn't see. I should have left, should have picked up my toolbox and walked out, but I was rooted, caught in the pull of her, in the way she seemed to carry a weight I could almost feel. She turned suddenly, breaking the moment, and reached for the kettle. "I lied about the coffee," she said, her voice lighter, like she was trying to pull us back to safer ground. "I'm out. Tea instead?" "Sure," I said, though I didn't care about the drink. I just didn't want to leave, not yet, not when the air felt like this. She filled the kettle, the sound of water sharp in the quiet, and I watched her move, deliberate and careful, like she was handling something fragile. The kitchen was warm, the rain a soft rhythm outside, and I felt that pull again, stronger now, like a tide dragging me under. The kettle hissed as it heated, and she leaned against the counter, her arms crossed, her eyes on the floor. "You ever feel like you're stuck?" she asked, her voice soft, like she wasn't sure she wanted an answer. "Like you're waiting for something, but you don't know what?" I nodded, though she wasn't looking. "Yeah, most days lately." She glanced up, and I saw something in her face. Relief, maybe, or recognition, like she'd been afraid I wouldn't get it. "Portsmill does that," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It slows everything down. Makes you forget what you're even waiting for." I wanted to ask more, to know why she stayed here, why she lived alone in this house with its sagging couch and its single photo frame. But I didn't. Instead, I said, "What keeps you here?" Her eyes flicked to mine, sharp and searching, and I knew I'd crossed a line. It was too personal, too direct, and I braced for her to shut down, to send me away. But she didn't. She just stood there, the kettle whistling now, and said, "It's home, even when it feels like a cage." The kettle clicked off, and she poured the water into 2 mugs, dropping tea bags into each. The steam curled upward, and she handed me a mug, her fingers brushing mine for a moment, sending a warmth through me that had nothing to do with the tea. We sat at the small kitchen table, the mugs between us, and the silence settled again. But it was different now, softer, like we'd both let down a guard we hadn't known we were holding. "You're not like the others here," she said after a while, her voice clear but quiet, like she was choosing her words carefully. "The guys at the shop, the ones at the bar, they're loud, sure of themselves. You're quieter, like you're afraid of breaking something." I laughed, embarrassed, my fingers tightening around the mug. "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" She smiled, a real one this time, and it lit up her face, made her look younger, softer, like the woman in that photo. "It's just true," she said. "You're careful." "It's rare." I didn't know what to say to that. She was right. I was careful, always had been, always trying not to mess things up, not to overstep. But sitting here, with her, I felt like I was already crossing a line, one I hadn't seen until it was too late. The tea was weak, chamomile, not my thing, but I sipped it anyway, letting the warmth settle me, letting her words sink in. The days after that were strange, like I was carrying her with me everywhere. I didn't see her, but she was there, in the way the rain smelled, in the flicker of a streetlight, in the quiet of my attic room. Work kept me busy. More boat consoles, a rush of oil changes, a transmission that fought me every step. But my mind kept drifting, replaying her voice, her half-smile, the way the air had felt in her kitchen. I told myself it was nothing, just a moment, just a job that had led to a cup of tea. But I was lying, and I knew it. It was a Thursday when I saw her again, at the Rusty Anchor. I'd gone there after work, needing to shake the shop's grease and the attic's silence. The bar was quiet, just a few fishermen and locals scattered under the dim lights, the jukebox playing a tired country song. I was at the counter, nursing a beer, when the door opened and she walked in. She wore that navy coat, her hair loose, and she didn't look around, just headed for a booth in the corner, pulling a book from her bag as she sat. I watched her order a glass of wine, open her book, and settle in, her movements precise, like she was carving out a space for herself. She didn't see me, or if she did, she didn't show it. I thought about leaving her alone, letting her have her quiet, but that pull was there, stronger than ever, tugging me toward her. I grabbed my beer and walked over, my heart pounding like I was about to jump off a cliff. "Mind if I join you?" I asked, standing by her booth, feeling like a kid asking for permission. She looked up, her eyes softening with surprise, maybe even warmth. "Owen," she said, her voice like a hand reaching out. "Sure, sit." I slid into the booth across from her, the table sticky, the air heavy with the smell of fried fish and beer. Her book was the same one from her house, about grief, its cover worn, and I wondered again what it meant to her, what she carried that I couldn't see. "Good book?" I asked, nodding at it, trying to keep things light. She shrugged, closing it with a soft thud. "It's heavy, but it helps, sometimes." I didn't push, didn't ask what she meant. Instead, we talked, about Portsmouth, about the way the harbor smelled at dawn, about the fog that never seemed to lift. It was easy, too easy, and I found myself leaning closer, my elbows on the table, her voice pulling me in like a current. She told me about growing up here, leaving for a while, coming back, though she didn't say why. I told her about Idaho, about the endless fields, about feeling like I was meant for something else, somewhere else. The bar emptied out, the lights dimming, and I realized we'd been talking for hours. Her wine glass was empty, my beer long gone, but neither of us moved. There was a moment, a pause, when her hand rested on the table, inches from mine, and I felt the air shift like it had in her kitchen, like it was holding its breath. "I should go," she said suddenly, her voice firm but quiet, like she was trying to convince herself. She stood, pulling her coat tight, and I felt a pang, like I'd missed something vital. "Yeah, me too," I said, standing with her. We walked out together, the night air cold and sharp, the streetlights casting long shadows on the wet pavement. Her car was a block away, and I walked her to it, not because I had to, but because I couldn't let the moment end. When we reached her Civic, she turned to me, her face half lit by the streetlight. "You're too kind, Owen," she said, her voice soft, almost sad, like she was carrying a weight I couldn't see. "You don't know what you're getting into." I frowned, confused, my breath catching in the cold. "What do you mean?" She looked at me, her eyes dark and unreadable, and I thought she'd turn away, leave it there. But then she stepped closer, so close I could feel her breath in the air, warm against the chill. "I'm not what you think," she said, her voice barely a whisper, and she reached out, her hand brushing my arm, light but deliberate, like a spark igniting something deep inside. I froze, my heart pounding, my mind screaming that I should step back, should say goodnight, should walk away, but I couldn't. Her touch was light, but it burned through my jacket, through my skin, and her eyes held mine, raw and unguarded, like she was letting me see something she'd kept hidden for years. I wanted to ask what she meant, wanted to know what made her say that, but the words wouldn't come. I just stood there, caught in her gaze, in the weight of the moment, the rain starting to fall again, soft and cold. She pulled back, her hand falling away, and the air felt emptier without it. "Good night, Owen," she said, her voice steady now, like she'd made a choice. She got into her car, the engine rumbling to life, and drove off, leaving me on the sidewalk, the rain soaking through my hoodie, my mind a tangle of want and fear. I walked back to my attic, the streets quiet except for the rain, and I couldn't shake her. Lydia, with her sharp eyes and her quiet pain, the way she'd looked at me like I was more than just a kid who fixed her car. I didn't know what had happened, but I knew it had shifted something, changed the ground under my feet. The next few days were agony. I didn't see her, didn't hear from her, and it felt like holding my breath. I kept expecting her to show up at the shop, to call about another problem, but nothing. I thought about driving by her house, but I didn't want to be that guy, the one who couldn't take a hint. So I waited, and the waiting was worse than anything. It was Monday, gray and cold, when she called the shop. Hal handed me the phone, his eyebrow raised like he knew something I didn't. "Lydia Marrow," he said. "Says her porch light's flickering again." I took the phone, my heart racing. "Hey, Lydia, what's up?" Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, like she was holding something back. "The light you fixed, it's acting up. Can you come by?" "Yeah, of course," I said, already grabbing my toolbox. "I'll be there in 20. When I pulled into Driftwood Court, the mist was thick, the pine forest looming dark behind her house. The porch light glowed steady, not flickering at all, and I frowned, confused, but knocked anyway. She opened the door, her gray sweater loose, her hair down, her eyes softer than I'd ever seen them, like she'd let down a wall. "Thanks for coming," she said, stepping aside, her voice quiet but warm. I glanced at the porch light as I passed. "Doesn't look like it's flickering," I said, setting my toolbox down, my hands unsteady. She closed the door, her movements slow, deliberate. "It's not," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just needed to see you." My breath caught, and I turned to face her, my toolbox forgotten. She was closer now, her eyes searching mine, and I felt that pull, stronger than ever, like a wave I couldn't fight. "Lydia," I said, my voice rough, "what are we doing?" She didn't answer, not with words. She stepped closer, her hand resting on my chest, light but steady, and I felt the world shrink to just her, just this moment. I should have stepped back, should have said something to break the spell, but I couldn't. I covered her hand with mine, feeling the warmth of her skin, the slight tremble in her fingers, and it was like everything else fell away. The rain, the town, the rules I didn't even know I was breaking. "I'm not what you think," she said again, her voice breaking, and she leaned in, her lips brushing mine, soft and hesitant like she was afraid of what it meant. I kissed her back, my hands finding her waist, and for a moment there was nothing else. Just her, just me, just the quiet truth of what we both wanted but couldn't say. When she pulled back, her eyes were wet, glistening in the dim light, and she looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. "This can't happen," she said, her voice trembling, but her hand was still on my chest, her fingers curled into my jacket, holding on. "I know," I said, but I didn't let go. I couldn't. Not yet. We stood there, caught in the space between what we wanted and what we knew, and I felt something shift inside me, something permanent, like a mark I'd carry forever. Her breath was uneven, her eyes searching mine, and I knew